Welcome back, everyone, to Talking Devils podcast, brought to you by talkingdevils.co.uk, your number one independent Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, Keane Franey, and today I am joined by a very special guest here this evening. I am joined by Karan Tejwani, who is an Ajax writer and recently released a book, Glorious Reinvention, The Rebirth of Ajax Amsterdam. So we're here today to talk all things Ajax. We're here to talk all things Erik Ten Hag, and also we're going to talk about Erik Ten Hag's links to Manchester United and potentially what he could bring to Manchester United if he is to become our new manager this summer. First of all, Karan, thanks very much for coming on the podcast this evening. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on. How are you today?
No worries, Keane. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing well. Yes, interested to get into this conversation, see what it's like. And obviously, I've been following Erik Ten Hag for a couple of years now, so he's always an interesting cat to talk about in football, especially now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he's probably the most talked about manager in world football at this moment in time, obviously with the job he's done at Ajax so far, and obviously the links to Man United are never ending since Ole Gunnar Solskjaer left our football club. But before we kind of talk about Erik Ten Hag and the links to Man United and stuff like that, first of all, I'd just like to obviously get a background on yourself in terms of what you do. Obviously, I see that you're a freelance writer. You write about Ajax. Obviously, you recently just released a book about the reinvention of Ajax Football Club. Just talk to our listeners who are Man United fans who may not be familiar with you. Can you just talk to us about what you do and kind of the recent work you've released?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been a freelance football writer for about 6 years now. Featured on various publications, mostly cover men's European football. So that is my main forte. I mainly watch German and English and Dutch football. So that's mainly what I cover. My latest book is called Glorious Reinvention, which will be out on April the 18th, which is about 2 and a bit weeks from now. It's called Glorious Reinvention. It's about the reinvention of Ajax as a football club as a whole in the 21st century, and it focuses on how they had a little slump in the first part of the 21st century and then redesigned themselves and basically, as the name suggests, reinvented themselves to becoming one of Europe's top clubs and one of Europe's healthiest clubs. And there's often an impression that Ajax may not be up there, and their recent Champions League exit may suggest otherwise. But it is clear to see they're one of Europe's healthier clubs, especially in the modern day.
Absolutely. Like if you look at the body of work Ajax have kind of done in the kind of last 5-6 years, especially under Erik Ten Hag, we've seen like a reinvention of Ajax. I think back from what we used to see back in the 80s and 90s and how good Ajax were and the beautiful football that was always like associated with them. Like anytime I watch Ajax in Champions League, they're a breath of fresh air. Obviously, former United player Daley Blind is there, who's actually one of my favourite players when he was actually at the football club, a very intelligent footballer. So anytime I see, if you're on the telly, like I would watch him. But like they obviously have done great things in the last 5-6 years. And as you said, like they have reinvented themselves kind of as a football club. But touching on obviously Ajax and Erik Ten Hag, because Ajax have been doing very well domestically this season, and obviously top of the league at the moment in the Eredivisie. But obviously, though, it's obviously a close-knit title race there. And as always, we're seeing in Champions League in the last couple of years, albeit knocked out recently by Benfica, but they did light up the Champions League, and they're one of the kind of standouts in the group phase this season. Just talk to us about Erik Ten Hag's kind of philosophy just this season and kind of how he's getting on at Ajax.
Well, for Ajax and Ten Hag, this season was a bit different. There was a high expectation going into the season itself because the season was, the last season was seen more as a I wouldn't say recovery, but as a transition season where they were sort of acclimatizing to this new squad. Obviously, the modern days, so we revert to Ajax from the 2018-19 season when they reached the Champions League semi-final. And they had a core group of talented players. Think of Onana, Matthijs de Ligt, Andre Onana, Frankie de Jong, Dusan Tadic, Donny van der Beek even. A lot of them left, and even Hakim Ziyech, they all left. Most of them left. That core group has now departed. So last season was seen as a way of sort of solidifying them, and this season was supposed to be the place where they sort of take this group to the next level. And a lot of that evolved around them being fairly successful in the Champions League, perhaps not reaching the semi-final, but at least going far enough and showing a good representation of themselves. And in the group stage, they did just that. 6 games, 6 wins. It was the perfect way of showing their strength. And it wasn't an easy group either. The Borussia Dortmund's a difficult challenge.
Yeah, they gave Borussia Dortmund the football lesson, didn't they, in the 2 games?
it was 7-0 in aggregate, 7-1 in aggregate, and then over the 2 games. And they give Dortmund a lesson in the highest stage. So they were doing very well, and perhaps the Benfica game isn't the best representation of this Ajax team as a whole. The second leg, obviously, 18 shots, I think, in the end, and they conceded just 1 shot on target. And unfortunately for them, that was the goal they ended up conceding that knocked them out. But in terms of this season itself, the philosophy, obviously, Erik Ten Hag sticking close to the traditional Ajax 4-3-3, the Ten Hag 4-3-3, playing a lot with their fullbacks, playing expansive football, playing with width. So it was a typical Ajax, a typical way we suggest with Ajax. The main changes I would suggest is, I would point out is the role of Daley Blind, for example, which was far more different this season compared to previous years. A couple of years ago, there's a suggestion that Daley Blind would be a full-time centre-half or play in the centre of the pitch, but he's been playing more on the left again this season, replacing Nicolas Tagliafico. So he's been a bit of a standout, or he was until for most parts of the season. Even in midfield, you see players like Edson Alvarez, Lisandro Martinez, who play in the centre of the pitch in defensive midfield. They've been stand-up players, both of them still incredibly young. Anthony, even on the far right side, incredible footballer. Obviously,
he's exciting, really exciting.
Yeah, lots of people talk about him all the time. So Anthony's been one of the stand-up players of the season. And the traditional older names, Tadic, Haller, all sort of stepping up to the level. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, the domestic season has been incredible for them, and they should do the double. I can't see them being stopped. The Champions League is a bit of a disappointment, but Ten Hag did say at the start of the month last month actually now, that reaching the round of 16 on itself was a goal, and that anything else would be a bonus. Which it feels like they're underselling themselves, but they should have probably gotten more from the Champions League, but that's gone now. So it's been a fairly successful season for them.
Yeah, I think when I seen the last 16 draw, obviously as a United fan, seeing kind of the games, obviously we had the defeat against Atletico Madrid, that's probably going to be 50-50 in terms of when the draw was made in terms of expectancy. But looking at Ajax, I genuinely thought they'd have enough to beat Benfica. Obviously, Benfica, we all know when they get past the group stage, their record outside of the group stage isn't great. They always seem to get knocked out in the last 16. And obviously, Ajax played beautiful football in the group stage. I was expecting them to go through, and as you said, it was just one of them days in the second leg where there was chance after chance, and the Benfica were just clinical on the day, and they did take their chance. Just in terms of Ten Hag's, you obviously mentioned his philosophy. He plays 4-3-3, and he plays kind of a very kind of press and counter pressing system. He's obviously worked with Ajax. And you mentioned in 2018-19 season when he got to the Champions League semi-final, and he had a brilliant core group of players. Obviously, Matthijs de Ligt, Frankie de Jong, Hakim Ziyech, Donny van de Beek, players like that. He had a very good core group of players, and obviously, we've seen that amazing run to the Champions League semi-final. Obviously, probably should have got to the final for the kind of a last kick of the game to get Lucas Moura with Tottenham Hotspur kind of the last couple of minutes. We all know what happened there. But in terms of how he's done with a rebuild, because obviously, the links at Man United are quite prevalent at the minute. And, he's massively linked to Man United, who do need a massive rebuild, obviously, on the back of the sacking of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. In terms of the rebuild he's done at Ajax, obviously, he's had to get a lot of players have been let go, and they've gone on to different clubs. And he's having to rebuild with kind of some younger players in the squad. How did he do this rebuild over kind of the 2-3 year period, and kind of how has that process been? Has he bled in youth? Has experience come in? How's that rebuild started?
Well, a lot of the rebuild comes with the structure Ajax have in place themselves. As a club, Ajax are, I don't have to say this very often, but Ajax are far more structured and far more thorough from a higher level than Man United are.
Yeah.
And probably many other clubs are on Europe. So a lot of that came through the work of several figures above Erik Ten Hag himself, and that includes people like Mark Overmars, who's not there anymore, and lots of other people at the club itself. So there's a whole football department behind Erik Ten Hag himself that's supporting Ten Hag in giving them the possibility of getting the best football results. And that's how it came about. When they sold their best players in 2019, and started off with De Ligt and De Jong, it started off with buying replacements even before they were gone. So people like Edson Alvarez, as I mentioned earlier, and Lisandro Martinez were already signed up to the club. And the plan for them was that they sign them up as young players, and in a 2-3 year period, develop them to become first team starters, which they are right now. So at Ajax, the philosophy for the last couple of years and even perhaps in the last decade or so has been as one player goes, there's always another player in the waiting, and whether that player's from the academy or he's brought in from abroad doesn't matter. But as long as there is a player in the waiting, ready to take up when when the top player leaves, they'll be fine. And the philosophy has worked for them for the last couple of years, and that's how it's been. They obviously prefer to have players coming through the academy, obviously Ryan Gravenberch now and even Jurgen Timber, who have become first team players. They're obviously improving, and the Ajax academy will always produce top talent. It's just a given now. It's an Ajax thing. So that's always there, and he's been accompanied by a lot of smart signings. So it doesn't have to be high quality signings or players signed for high fees, as long as they fit the mold of a typical Ten Hag player or a typical Ajax player. They will be useful to the squad. So even the signing of Dusan Tadic, who was signed in 2018 before that season, they add value to the squad. They add experience. They add a certain value in terms of bringing off-pitch credibility, bringing some leadership. So that sort of thing is quite important. So they do analyze their signings quite well. If it's a young player, he has to be a player that has a lot of desire to grow, a lot of drive, a lot of potential, obviously. And if it's an older player, it has to be a player that brings certain value to the squad, not just on the pitch, but off it as well. So it's the whole process that Ajax goes through, and Ten Hag is a crucial part of that process, because obviously Ten Hag is the head coach, so the football has to be determined by the head coach. But yeah, as I was saying earlier, Erik Ten Hag is a very smart manager, and Man United perhaps won't be the same structure as Ajax, but he would bring some level of credibility to Man United should he go there.
Yeah, you mentioned structure. I think obviously, like looking at Man United, if you look at the last decade post Sir Alex Ferguson, the structure has been fractured. Like that's probably the best word I could use in terms of obviously Sir Alex and David Gill, two of them alone were just. Alex Ferguson was the director of football, but also a manager. Like he was everything. Alex Ferguson, he had his hand at everything. The football club, and David Gill just get the deals done. Obviously, it's a lot different now. Obviously, we had Ed Woodward. Now we've Richard Arnold as chief executive. Now, obviously, we've Darren Fletcher, kind of John Murtaugh as sporting director and technical director at this moment in time. So it's a different structure of what we had in the last couple of years. But when you look at Erik Ten Hag, Karen, and you look at kind of he has a good, brilliant way of playing football. He's a 4-3-3. He's a very kind of expansive manager, and he does like to have technical players in his system. Obviously, with the links of Erik Ten Hag coming to the football club, has sparked a great debate within the Manchester United fan base as towards like what type of players he would like and what type of players he may not like. One of the players who was recently signed a new contract, actually as of today, is Bruno Fernandes. Now, Bruno Fernandes, in many people's opinions, wouldn't be a typical Erik Ten Hag player, but I just want to ask, in terms of like his system, in terms of obviously he plays a 4-3-3 and he's very flexible in the way he does things. Do you look at Bruno Fernandes as a player that maybe, if Erik Ten Hag does come to Man United, that can maybe be used in the same kind of role as what Dusan Tadic was? Because Tadic kind of adapted his game, so obviously compared to what he was at Southampton, now Ajax, he seems like to be a different player altogether. Do you think maybe if Ten Hag comes to Man United, do you think maybe Ten Hag can maybe use Bruno Fernandes in the Dusan Tadic role, or could Bruno Fernandes adapt to maybe the midfield three that Erik Ten Hag would play?
I don't think there's necessarily a Dusan Tadic sort of role for Bruno Fernandes. I think the thing about Tadic was that he always had a bigger attacking instinct than Bruno Fernandes does have right now, I'd assume, or I'd say. There's more of an attacking intent, and Bruno Fernandes is an incredible footballer, always looking to play forward, and it's a similar mold. But I think that he would be used in a similar role to as he was under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, where he was given more freedom to basically do whatever he wanted as long as he was playing in the attacking zones. So I think that, as you mentioned, I think Bruno Fernandes will be quite important under Erik Ten Hag, but perhaps not in the same type sort of space or mold that you recommend. But yeah, I think that I wouldn't say he's a type of player. I think in terms of, if I were to give him an Ajax sort of centric role, it would be more for an Anthony thing, where he's given sort of the freedom to basically do whatever he wants in attack and sort of open up spaces for the forwards in front of him. But obviously it's hard to judge right now because the summer transfer window is so crucial for Man United, because they need to get not just one or two, but maybe 3 or 4 players, get them in and see how they fit into the squad and fit with the manager's style. So it's hard to judge at this moment because the squad is so disjointed, United.
Yeah.
and it's sort of dysfunctional in a way, and perhaps they haven't got the right players for right positions, especially if Ten Hag comes in. But if it were to be Ten Hag, and if it was, if it was Bruno Fernandes, let's say he'd be given a higher midfield role, perhaps play in a higher attacking zone, and basically do whatever he wants, similar to what he did in Solskjaer.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be a lot of music to a lot of Man United fans' ears, because I think with Bruno at the moment under Ralph Rangnick, he's playing in more of a number eight position. He's kind of dropping, well, nearly a blend between a 6 and an 8 at the minute, because he's dropping so deep. Whereas under Ollie, you're absolutely right. He picked up more advanced roles, and he was influencing the game further forward. I think maybe under Ralph, we're seeing a different side of Bruno, but we're not seeing the best of him this season. And obviously, under Solskjaer, we've seen in the first 2 seasons what Bruno Fernandes could do. So, yeah, look, I absolutely agree. I think I'd like to see him in kind of a higher up the pitch, whether that's maybe, I know Ten Hag is very adaptable in the way he does his 4-3-3. Sometimes he does have a 10 there. So I'd like to see maybe Bruno kind of back in around that role, and definitely having a heavy influence, especially in a Ten Hag system, because there's a lot of debate that Bruno wouldn't be able to play in a Ten Hag system. But when I look how quick he played football at Sporting Lisbon in a system, he has played in the system before. So I think Bruno definitely could be a player that can thrive under Erik Ten Hag.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, he is probably one of the most talented players they have in the squad right now, United. So it's almost undoubted that whoever comes in will like him. So I can't see any reason why he won't be. And I don't think he's necessarily had a bad season either, right? It's not his best compared to the 2 previous years. Maybe because we're judging about the amount of output he had every year. And this season has been more difficult for so many of the players, not just for Bruno Fernandes as well. Think of players like Rashford, even Harry Maguire to an extent. A couple of those names who just sort of had a slump this season. It's hard to say where it's from. It could be it's definitely multiple reasons. So it's hard. He will be liked by, as I said earlier, he will be liked by whatever manager comes in, because he is that sort of player, the sort of player who creates and sort of who drives his team forward and makes other players around him better. So I have no doubt that he will be successful regardless of what the manager is, Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And look, if it's Pochettino, he wanted to sign him with Spurs, so I dare to say 100%, if one of them 2 managers comes in, he will most definitely have a role. One thing I've always kind of seen about Erik Ten Hag's system is he plays kind of a very high line. Like if his teams push very high up the pitch and they put teams under pressure. Harry Maguire, obviously, look, there's a lot of talk about Harry Maguire in the media at the moment, obviously, due to the international situation with the fans booing him and stuff like that. But in terms of Harry Maguire this season, obviously, he struggled kind of playing in a high line under Solskjaer and also now under Rangnick as well. When you look at the way Erik Ten Hag plays, he always seems to have kind of quick centre-backs and pushing up high, and centre-backs who can be kind of deal with pressure on the counter-attack. If you were looking from the outside looking in, and you see the way Harry Maguire is playing this season, would you be any bit concerned if Erik Ten Hag comes in that Harry Maguire can maybe be surplus to requirements, considering Erik Ten Hag's style of play?
It's a bit of a yes and no thing. I think that in a way there's quite a good centre half in Harry Maguire on his day. I think we saw that at the Euros. We saw that in a couple of moments over the last 2 years. Even at Leicester, I think he was better than people gave him credit for. So there's definitely a good footballer in Harry Maguire. I don't think he's as bad as he's often made out to be. And a lot of the issues for him and for United as a football club come down to the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, it's a disjointed squad that doesn't really benefit players playing at the back because they're so exposed a lot of the time. So I think he will be given a chance. Personally, I think he will be given a chance. I think that Ten Hag will at least like to give him that benefit of the doubt, saying, it's a better, or hopefully it will be a better squad by the time he comes in, and that he will be getting a chance to prove himself, because he's proven to be, as you mentioned, quite good in the ball, quite good at carrying the ball forward. And he might not have shown that at his best this season, but I think that it's worth giving that shot one more time just to see how it goes. I can agree that he's not the best centre half in the world, or he's the best centre half in the league, but he does have certain qualities that lots of managers would like, and I think Ten Hag would like to have his ball playing ability in the squad. I think that he's probably one of the best in the squad itself, so he'd be quite good to have there.
Yeah, and I agree in terms of the ball playing ability, because I remember last season him and Luke Shaw on that left hand side. Maguire used to drive out his ball, pump the ball into the left channel, pumped into Rashford and Shaw on the overlap. That was very dangerous on the left hand side last year. So I think under Ten Hag, if we can replicate that, would be absolutely brilliant to see. Because I think, I don't know, is the case, obviously, there's a lot happened in the last kind of like 6 to 12 months. Like if you look at Harry Maguire's injury before the Euros, he obviously missed the Europa League final. Obviously losing the Euros final psychologically, that can obviously hinder that. Obviously, then we fell into a bad slump of form. Solskjaer sacked him. There's a lot of uncertainty around the football club. Maybe it's the case you're right. Like maybe he needs some time off. Maybe after the summer, coming under a new manager, new system, something more structured, we might see the best Harry Maguire. And look, if we can keep Raphael Varane fit beside him and they get more time to play together, and then maybe we can see the best Harry Maguire that we did see last season. And look, I do agree from a ball playing standpoint. Probably our best ball playing centre back, even though I'd probably argue Victor Lindelof. And you've seen the last 2 seasons, he's been exceptional with the amount of assists, and especially his long ball playing ability has been superb in the last kind of 6 months. So I think Maguire, I think Lindelof could be used under Ten Hag as well. He seems to be probably even we have Raphael Varane, and Varane's played well, but he's been injured quite a lot this season. I think arguably Victor Lindelof's probably been our best centre back this season, even though like maybe last season we probably wouldn't have been saying that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because there's so many players coming in and out of the squad this season, it's just been so inconsistent. It's hard to. It's. I mean, you can't say one of them is the best, but because that only comes down to the fact that because so many of them have been so inconsistent. Obviously, Varane's been injured for lots of parts of it. Maguire has come in and he's had more injuries this season, I think, than a couple of years, than the last few years combined. And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, I think the psychological part of it plays a big role as well. Some of the England players that lost the Euros final, it's a silly trend that I've been keeping track of. Some of the England players that have played in the Euros final. It's a bit soul-crushing to lose a home final and lose a final in that circumstance on penalties.
Yeah.
So I imagine that it must have played a big psychological role, especially if you're a Rashford or Sancho who missed the penalties. And Maguire obviously he takes a lot of abuse. Even last week or this past week when he was playing a friendly for England, it must have a toll on a footballer's mind. So there's obviously a big psychological factor there as well. It is quite difficult. But because there's been so much inconsistency, it's you could say Lindelof is the best, but it's not really high bar to cross because of how
it's not a high bar. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's not very. It's so on and off. It's really unfair to say one's been the best and one's been the worst because of how inconsistent it is.
Yeah, it's just kind of like when you look at the trajectory of the centre halves, the bar probably hasn't been that high this season, and that's probably why we'd be like many Man United fans would be saying that this season. One thing I'd just like to ask you about Ten Hag, because obviously he's used a lot of young players in the last couple of years. You've mentioned obviously Anthony, Ryan Gravenberch, Alvarez, players like that. Obviously, Man United have a brilliant academy as well, and we've have a great bunch of players coming through as well. But in terms of the way Ten Hag has an influence over an academy, does he like to have, like, let's say the academy, like let's say the 18s and 23s, would he like them to be playing the same style of play as what the first team would be? And is that something that he has done in the past with Ajax?
There's always a similar Ajax way to play. I wouldn't say it's been away for the last 50 odd years, but there's always a similar Ajax way to play that sort of integrates the younger players into the first team fast, and that's very similar to what many top clubs do, which is basically be commanding in possession, that the defenders and goalkeepers must be equal, they must be good on the ball, be more authoritative on the ball, and always have a forward-thinking mentality, which is, as the word suggests itself, the way it must be forward. So it becomes easier for youngsters to sort of integrate themselves and coaches to integrate these younger players into the first team, and that certainly benefits Erik Ten Hag. He has a say in the academy. He keeps up with them quite often. It's quite common to see him in communication with the people below him in the under 23s and the under 21s, with the second team. So he is quite influential in that department. I wouldn't say he's most influential because there's a bit of a gap there, but he does tend to sort of keep an eye on them. But with Ajax itself, because of how structured they are and how much intent they show in sort of developing their own talent, it sort of becomes an easier job for any manager to come in and integrate these academy talent. And I don't want to downplay it, but that's just how it is at Ajax. They're so determined to improve their own talent, and it makes the manager's role easier. But that's how it is. And certainly helps Ten Hag as well, because United have so many good players coming up as well. You think of James Garner, Hannibal Mejri, whoever. It just becomes an easier job for him as well, and certainly help him out.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned two players there, obviously Garner and Hannibal, two players who I think were on the real cusp of getting into the first team. Obviously, you have Alejandro Garnacho as well, who's got caught. He hasn't made a first team appearance for Man United, but he's getting called up to the Argentina senior team. So, like, if I look at Erik Ten Hag coming in, I'd be very happy because I know his track record of playing youth is quite good. So, I think that would be a lot of music to Manchester United fans' ears. The fact he has that type of philosophy. I think one thing we love, and most football fans love it, but I think one thing especially Ajax and Man United kind of have in common is young players coming through and succeeding. There's always kind of that kind of relationship that the fans have with their clubs in that regard. Obviously, you look at us in the last decade, obviously McTominay, Rashford, and players like that have come through. Other players as well. Like we've had a lot of good players come through the academy in the last kind of 5-6 years. So I'd love to see someone like Ten Hag come in who works at young players, but like there is a lot of players in the academy at the moment that I think could definitely thrive and definitely benefit from Erik Ten Hag coming in. Let's say opposed to like a Diego Simeone or someone, or a Conte or someone like that. I think a manager like Ten Hag could definitely help benefit from that. But obviously there's been a lot of talk of Ten Hag to Man United, and he recently actually just done an interview today, obviously talking about his season with Ajax. Obviously his concentration is on Ajax this season, and kind of he's not looking kind of further ahead. In terms of like Erik Ten Hag's links to Man United, have you, obviously because you report on Dutch football, is there anything kind of you've heard in terms of kind of how close he could be to go to Man United, or how serious the talks have been?
I can only tell you what the press tells you, and obviously today the interview came out with the German paper, and it's typical manager talk where they say they're not going to discuss other clubs and they focus on their current clubs, which is similar to what Ten Hag did today. He's focused on Ajax, but the general feeling, or the feeling more over the last 1 or 2 months, is that he's more likely to go than he is to stay. And I think a large reason behind that is the departure of Mark Overmars. From my personal opinion, if you asked me this 2 months ago, I would have said Ten Hag is more likely to stay than go. But ever since Overmars left, I think it's more likely he goes than stays because of the relationship he had with Overmars. And I think that's going to be playing a huge factor at the end of it, because Overmars and Ten Hag, they had the relationship was quite good, mainly because of how well they communicate and how well they work together in terms of building the squad together and building this sort of football relationship where they determine the future of the football side of things together. So because that's now non-existent, I think it's more likely he goes and he stays. And it's a good enough time for him to leave, because in the last 4 years, Ten Hag's he's done an incredible job at Ajax. One Champions League semi-final. He's going to end up if this season goes to plan, he'd have 3 league titles and 3 domestic cups. Could well have been 4 each or it would have been 4 each if it wasn't for COVID. And he's had a good transfer record as well. So he's done as well as he possibly could. And maybe the only downside would be one more Champions League run would have been nice. But even then, it's still quite a good CV to have as an Ajax manager. So my own personal feeling is that he will leave by the end of the season, which wasn't the same feeling I had 2 months ago. But that is how it is now. I think that he will be going and joining Man United. I think that's my feeling now.
Yeah, it looks like he's the front runner at the minute for the job. Obviously, United are briefing to the press at the minute that it's meant to be like a thorough interviewing process. But I think all signs are leading to Erik Ten Hag. He's probably the best manager that is available. I think though, if United are to hire Erik Ten Hag, and you mentioned it earlier on the podcast, is that they need to have a structure above him to make sure he succeeds. Because obviously, you look at the structure he's had at Ajax. He's had a very good regimented structure there. I think he will have to have that at Man United as well. Now, obviously, Richard Arnold is obviously saying that he's given more, obviously, the onus to the football inside, unlike Ed Woodward done. Now, obviously, the proof will be in the pudding come the summer, if that's the case. We will obviously see that this summer. But I think, he's a fantastic manager. He's very highly thought of, and I think United need to act now and get him, because I think if United fumble this and let's say we don't get him and we get someone else in who's probably not as highly rated as him, I worry about in 12 months' time Pep Guardiola leaves Man City and Erik Ten Hag goes in there. That could be like Manchester City are already terrorizing the Premier League. There would be no transitional time if he comes in, because obviously they're nearly a carbon copy of each other.
Yeah, it's a good time for United to sort of act on it. But I must add that it's not just the one person. Erik Ten Hag is not going to fix up the whole football club. It needs to be an overall change of structure, an overall sort of improvement of the club, and that doesn't just revolve around the first team. I think, there needs to be a proper football. I would say structure again. There needs to be a proper football structure in place in terms of transfers, in terms of what sort of style they want to set out, what sort of philosophy they want to keep around the club, even for the academy talent. The academy has been fairly successful. I think that's probably the best part about the club right now, that they've been keeping that sort of the tradition alive and keeping those players coming through the club. But there needs to be more from the first team level. I don't think one manager or bringing in one good manager is going to fix everything. There's at United right now, there's lots of players that shouldn't be there in terms of talent. I don't think lots of players are good enough to play for the club. I don't think a lot of them have an idea of what they're doing because it's so unstructured and it's so disjointed as well. So Ten Hag will iron out a lot of the issues. He will bring a clear football philosophy to the team, but he needs to be supported from above. And if, for example, he wants a player, he demands that that player be at the club, it needs to be given to him so that he can have the best resources around him to sort of excel his own work and in turn make the team better. But yeah, we've seen good managers come to the club at the par. I don't think that Jose Mourinho and Louis van Gaal were bad managers when they joined the club.
No.
Certainly did a good job beforehand, and they struggled at Man United when they joined. And when they leave, they did complain about the structure of the club and how it was so convoluted. And if it was one manager complaining, saying it was convoluted, it'd be fine. But if it's 2, 3, 4 of them saying there's a problem, then there must be a problem. And the fans know by now that there's a problem at the club, and it's not always entirely down to the manager. So the reason, my own personal preference would be that Erik Ten Hag doesn't go to Man United because he's a good manager, and there's always a possibility that a perfectly good manager with great potential for the future is ruined by a club as complicated as Man United. But if they do get Ten Hag, there has to be a turning point, and where the Man United board says this is our turning point, this is where we change things, and this is how we go for the future, and Ten Hag is our main man leading it.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think this is definitely, if there ever is a turning point, and obviously there's a massive rebuild that's ahead, I think now is the time for United to do it. And I think, look, the best step is to do it with a progressive manager and get obviously a progressive board behind them. Obviously, football people on the board. Obviously, there's a lot of scrutiny over Darren Fletcher and John Murtaugh. But I think they deserve to be given the chance to see if they can get it right. Obviously, this is their first proper year in there, so I think they deserve a chance, obviously, to get things right in there, because it's the first time we've actually had people in them roles. I think it's time to give them a chance. I think every Man United fan's dream at the moment is for Van der Sar to come over and direct their football role. That would just be an absolute dream if we had him there. But obviously, look, that's definitely not going to happen. But it's just a dream for all of us over here. But just the final question I have for you, just with regards to Erik Ten Hag and kind of what he could bring to Man United, is Scott McTominay has obviously been playing in the number 6 role for United this season. Obviously, kind of Erik Ten Hag prefers, kind of from what I know, prefers like kind of a ball playing number 6 in his systems. Would McTominay be a player that he'd be interested in playing, or do you maybe think he may be looking for a different player, kind of in the ilk of a kind of a Frankie de Jong?
I think he'd be in the squad for sure. He'd be part of the squad for sure because he brings some valuable quality. I think his tenacity, sort of intensity, is quite good, McTominay, and I think he'd be quite useful. I think they've had he's played under 3 or 4 managers, McTominay has, and he's been quite useful under all of them. Even Radney right now, he's got a few games under him, and they've all sort of praised his tenacity. So I think that's quite useful to have in the squad. I don't necessarily think he'll be a typical first team player per se, but I do think that if Ten Hag does come in, he would bring in a different player for that midfield role, someone who's sort of better on the ball, better at moving the ball forward. I do think McTominay's biggest issue is being on the ball itself. He doesn't really have that sort of risk-taking ability to sort of drive the ball forward and play that sort of attacking football that teams require. He's good at his job for sure. I think that he's definitely Premier League quality and should be playing at this level for sure. But I don't necessarily think that if Ten Hag comes in, he'd be a first-team regular. I think that the level he's at right now, where he occasionally comes in and plays in a big game every once in a while, or if he starts against a mid-table side to sort of solidify that defense and bring a bit more for midfield presence. I think that's his role. I don't necessarily think he's that sort of player to sort of move the team forward and bring an attacking aura to a team.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think like obviously one of his biggest flaws is kind of probably shown for the ball from the two centre halves. So he doesn't kind of play that pass off quickly like in the past when we had Michael Carrick in the sixth role. We've seen how good we were breaking the lines. Though obviously we don't have that type of player anymore. But yeah, 100%. I think he would be a squad player. I think definitely if you look at him further forward, he's a better box to box than a six. Obviously Rangnick has been playing him in the six. So yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe in the bigger games we need kind of not the bigger games, sorry, the games against the teams who are kind of bigger in midfield and have a lot of physicality. Obviously the Burnleys, teams like that. I think McTominay probably will be utilised in them types of games. But yeah, look, it's very interesting to see how if Ten Hag does come in, what he does do with Scott McTominay and the likes of Fred as well. Will they have a role not so much in the six, but maybe further forward? But Karan, it's been an absolute fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed your company here today on Talk the Devil. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Just with regards, just before we wrap up this show, do you have anything coming up in the future? Any new books and any interesting projects coming up soon?
No, I just must add my book again. I think the book's out on 18th of April. That's my next book coming out. It's on Ajax, and that's the only project I can talk about right now. But yeah, I just keep freelance writing. I'm writing for a couple of websites. You can always find my work on Twitter or on my other social platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And do check out Karan's Twitter. Will be in the video link description when we do upload this video. But thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in here this evening. It's been an absolute fantastic conversation and great insight on Erik Ten Hag if he does come in to Manchester United, guys. But thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, guys, we'll see you later.